Hola, I'm Claudia Romo Edelman.
And I'm Cynthia Kleinbaum Milner.
And this is a podcast, A La Latina.
The playbook to succeed being your authentic self.
Today, the incredible Lucy Pérez.
Lucy is a senior partner at McKinsey.
And here are the key 3 takeaways of this show. Number 1, no one in your company is a mind reader, but everyone will take joy in helping you out.
Number 2, she gave us insight into how she managed her relationship with her sponsors and how each one of them had a different role in helping her succeed.
And number 3, she gave us a business case with data and insights on how to invest in Latinos as entrepreneurs within companies as for yourself. So all of that and more here at A La Latina.
Stick around. Before this episode starts, go to alalatina.com and sign up for our newsletter. We've put together a ton of career advice and worksheets that you can download to manage your career and get to the top in half the time
with half the bruises. A La Latina. Today, the incredible Lucy Pérez.
Lucy is a senior partner at McKinsey, where she is the global leader of the McKinsey Health Institute. She co-leads the McKinsey Institute for Economic Mobility. She's on the board of MassBio, a biotech association of Massachusetts. She's on the board of Mass Business Roundtable and on the board of the Aspen Institute Latinos in Society program.
Lucy, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be with both of you.
You're such a trailblazer, one of the proudest Hispanic stars that we see everywhere, having influence in so many different organizations, having actually built something that goes to the White House and has a nation but also global impact. How did you get to be where you are and what you do today? What's your background? What's your story?
It's probably a little bit of an unconventional path, right? But I grew up in Puerto Rico in a small family, my mom, my dad, and my younger brother and I. And my parents had emigrated from northern Spain to Puerto Rico looking for better opportunities. And I grew up in, a very close family. And the thing when you grow up in a place like Puerto Rico, I mean, it's a small island, right? 100 miles by 35, surrounded by water. I think you grow up with a natural curiosity, right? About the world beyond your boundaries, right? The other thing that I think growing up in Puerto Rico did for me is that obviously Puerto Rico is a mix, right? It is a mix of the original indigenous culture, the Tainos, the Spanish culture, the American culture. And that just gives you an appreciation, right? For like, how do you create the best of all possible worlds? And so I grew up there and from an early age was really interested in medicine, right? I had a great-grandmother who had suffered a stroke, and I saw how she struggled early on. My grandfather dealing with diabetes. And I really thought, oh my gosh, my mission in life is to dedicate myself to medicine and help people be healthier. But, as often happens, life throws you curveballs. And I was volunteering at a local hospital in Puerto Rico when I was in high school. Back in the day, they would let someone like me, 16-year-old, think about, dispensing the pills, taking them to the patients. It goes to show I'm a little bit older. But what I realized during that time at the hospital, I do not like the sight of blood. I really don't.
This is the second time we hear this today. Okay, so blood is the killer of future doctors in the Latino
You
community.
need to know if you like it,
Yes.
totally.
Exactly. And same thing happened in biology class, and we had to do for anatomy, dissect a frog. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank goodness for my friend who took over, right? But it forced me to rethink what I wanted to do, right? And so it was this thing where, in high school, I had always loved math and thought, well, maybe I'll go to college and study math, right? But what I realized when I got to college, math started getting a little too theoretical, away from the practical implications, which is what I liked. I'm someone who grew up, my dad had a couple of restaurants and, growing up, I would help him with inventory, keeping track of, how much of different types of merchandise, adding, subtracting. I love the practicality of it, right? That's, I think, how I quickly built up my math skills as a young kid. But yeah, I got to college and I wasn't sure, I took
In
pre-med.
Puerto Rico?
Oh,
College?
No, college was in Boston. So
All
I
right.
went to Harvard. And which was, very different environment from, where I grew up. And I was really intimidated, right? I think, like many, suffering from a bit of imposter syndrome as you get somewhere and your whole life changes, right? My parents, for example, don't speak a word of English. And suddenly I'm here having to do my whole life in English, right? Where you grow up in Puerto Rico and I'm like everyone else. And suddenly you realize this concept of being a minority, it's something that's new. It was to me, right? In moving.
But how did you get into Harvard?
I had great teachers, great parents, and great experiences that I think prepared me for it.
So Harvard College, which is probably one or the most competitive process to get into a college, they pick people not just based on grades, but also based on what they can bring to the table, right? To the class. So how did you come up with the idea, I'm going to apply to Harvard? Like, did you have mentors, guides?
Yeah. So growing up, I did not think I would go to college in the US. I actually thought it was more likely I would study in Puerto Rico or maybe back in Spain where my parents were from. But in high school, I had several teachers who especially encouraged me to apply to summer programs the summer between junior and senior year of college. And one of the programs I applied to was actually at MIT. And that program was a real eye opener and door opener for me because suddenly I could see myself, right? I could see myself walking those hallways. I could see myself being an MIT student. And I had a wonderful summer. I learned a lot, but most importantly, my confidence really grew around I can do this, right? I can come to one of these schools and thrive. And so when I went back to high school that fall and I was thinking about where should I be applying to school, I decided to apply to a couple of the American schools as well. So not only did I apply to University of Puerto Rico, the local school, but I applied to MIT, I'd applied to Harvard and a couple others. And yeah, when it came time to make a decision, I had a wonderful pre-frosh weekend at Harvard that ended up being the determining factor.
And then you did Harvard.
I did Harvard and I did it for 10 years. Not just to do my undergrad, but I liked it so much. I stayed there to do my master's degree and then my PhD. So it ended up being a 10-year journey in Cambridge, which just goes to show if I find a place I like, I can stick with it, right?
So that's now you do a lot of research and like besides the work that you do as a partner,
Yes.
probably with clients, you do a lot of the type of work that you were doing probably as a PhD.
In a way, yes. I'm someone who's always been very intellectually curious. I love to read, learn new things. It's taken on different forms over the years. First, it was about learning more languages, And in my time at McKinsey, I really like being part of a team that pushes the boundary around what we know about certain topics and how can we use the knowledge, the new insights, not only to close health gaps, because clearly I still have that repressed medical doctor inside of me still, but particularly how do we create win-wins, right? How do you think about improvements in health as opportunities to build stronger communities, stronger economies? And that's something that you'll see a lot in my work, right? Like when we create win-win situations that everyone benefits, I mean, we should be doing more of that.
Yeah. So you went from Harvard straight to McKinsey?
No. So after I finished my PhD, so I did my PhD in organic chemistry. It was a way of being really close to medicine, right? Because the organic chemists are the ones who are making the drugs, right? Who are very close and thinking about how can we develop a new molecule that's going to help someone be in better health. And so for me, I loved it, right? It was a way of being close to the health ecosystem, but no blood, no anatomy, no cadavers to have to work on. And so after I finished my PhD, I decided to do a postdoc. That scientist in me, very intrigued. And I moved to New York City at that time to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center.
yeah.
Because again, I really wanted to be close to the medicine. I thought this is one of the leading institutions in cancer care. And I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be part of how do we develop better, drugs that help give people more days in good health. And so I went to Memorial Sloan Kettering. I stayed there for 3 years. And
What were you doing there?
we were working on new molecules to build to my particular project was focused on thinking about how can we prevent metastases, right? The spreading of cancer cells in the body, because we know outcomes turn a lot worse once cells metastasize. So we were developing new molecules that could prevent that
What was your
metastasis.
job? Like you were on a lab?
I was in
Like
a
literally?
lab, with my lab coat, the safety goggles, working in the hood,
Wow.
pipetting away, making sure, we had the right mix of reagents so we didn't have any, sudden fires in the
Yeah.
lab. Yes.
Wow. Like, how does somebody with that background then end up being hired? Well, you tell us what happened after.
So what happened? I had another one of those pivotal moments in my life where I thought I was going to go and join a pharmaceutical company and keep working on making those molecules, being part of, that system, these researchers who are working so hard to develop new drugs as a way to improve human health. And I had my first job interview. And this particular company, the chemistry labs, were in the basement of the building. There was no natural light. I am a girl from Puerto Rico who loves the sun, who loves being outdoors. And I remember that first interview and thinking, this cannot be the next few years of my life to be in this
This
basement.
was your blood. The equivalent
Yeah.
of blood. They were like, oh no.
No, I can't do it. I mean, I still remember the feeling I had that day of a bit of a panic attack. Did I plan poorly?
Yeah.
Because I cannot see myself spending the next, years working in a hood in this space that has no natural light and where it felt, it was, mostly men. As I was in that room, I would have been the only woman, and it felt very lonely. And so I had to rethink, right? I still continued interviewing in multiple places, but I wasn't feeling the energy.
Yeah.
I wasn't feeling this fits the goals that I have for myself or the impact I aspire to have, and being surrounded by an environment that I thought really fit with me. And so I decided to apply for consulting jobs. I had done my undergrad at Harvard, and many of my classmates had gone down that path, whether it's consulting or investment banking. I thought that could be a really good way of spending a couple of years and figuring out what to do with my life.
Yeah. A lot of people go to consulting when they don't know what to do.
Exactly, right? You kind of do it for a year or two and you learn so much. That was 18 years ago.
18 years.
Yes.
Also, McKinsey is a pretty ruthless pyramid culture where it's like up or out, at least at the beginning, right? Like, so what do you think? And by up or out, I mean a percentage of each class has to leave.
10% a year, right?
More,
10% a
more.
year, the less performing.
Well, what happens at McKinsey, right? It is we operate from a place of we work hard. Yes, there's no question because we're tackling really big problems. We pride ourselves on working on the toughest problems with our clients, right? Like that's why they call McKinsey in. And so yes, it is intense, right? And what you see is indeed a lot of people choose to do this for only a couple of years. A few of us stay, as long as I have, 18 years. But I feel in exchange for that, right, it is one of the most accelerated learning journeys you can imagine. When I think of myself and how much I've learned each year, how I continue to grow year on year, I mean, it's actually one of the things that I really like about being at McKinsey.
Well, you have made a gigantic impact in two areas, right? Like one of them is health and the other one is economic impact, where you're really directly providing so much insight to Latinos, particularly.
Yes, no, and it is because, and that's probably the reason I'm still there 18 years later, right? Because I get to do what I love, right? I really had this early dream of being able to influence health outcomes for as many people as possible because health is so foundational. Without health, it's not as easy to do the things we aspire to. And then going back to that feeling I mentioned when I, started at Harvard of feeling lonely, beginning to understand this idea of being considered a minority, it has been very personal to me to think about how do we encourage, an understanding of what does inclusive growth mean, right? Like how when we focus on building stronger societies and stronger economies, everyone benefits.
So you're a senior partner, and then you have two other hats, right? Being the global leader for the Health Institute and the co-leader for the Institute of Economic Mobility. First question, is that a path that you're encouraged to take? Like, do all partners are asked to do more than just being a partner? And is that good for your career? And then the second question, and then you answer. One of them is obviously your passion, right? The Health Institute. Is being Latina or being from Puerto Rico has been that applause for you to be able to lead the Institute for Economic Mobility? Now, you go.
Okay, let's see. And I will package it into
Yes.
smaller bits, right? So at McKinsey, we're actively encouraged to lead, right? And to think about how do we make a lasting impact. And it can take on many forms. In my case, indeed, I have been very passionate about how do we contribute to better health outcomes, right? And so when I had the opportunity to join the leadership of the McKinsey Health Institute, it was a dream, right? I think of the mission of the McKinsey Health Institute. It is all about how do we add years to life and life to years. Too often we're just focused around how to live longer, but we want to live longer in good health, right? That is essential. And being able to be part of how do we drive the insights, right? And then not only the insights of what it takes, but that we can partner with our clients around how to actually implement those strategies. That's a dream, right? Because that is really trying to translate the insights into action. To your question about being Latina, it is something that clearly defines me, right? And it is in the way that I approach relationship building, that I approach creating new things. And for me, again, one of the things that I've really enjoyed at McKinsey is the freedom that we have to build, right? To think about, we've had a community of Latinos and their allies at McKinsey the whole time I've been at the firm. And I still remember we were having an offsite. This would have been like when I was about 3 to 4 years into the firm. And we were reflecting that what we were focused on was really primarily connectivity and development of their colleagues, right? So in a way, it was very internally focused. It was all about how can we do better at McKinsey. And what we came away from that conversation and that offsite is we should be doing more. We shouldn't be so inward looking. We should be thinking about how can we make a difference externally, right? How can we leverage some of the strengths, right, of McKinsey, which are people, our insights, to help make a difference. And so that led us to convene a group of Latino leaders from multiple industries for a day in DC. And we don't have all the answers. We actually want to hear from you. How can we be helpful, right? How can we contribute? So that day in DC was really special because what we heard is indeed there was an opportunity and a role that we could play, particularly in highlighting things like what is the Latino wealth creation journey? What are the opportunities to drive stronger economies by closing some of the gaps that we see in Latino economic mobility? Something more formal with greater ability to serve, right?
So it started as an initiative led by Latinos thinking about the Latino community, but it's not just for.
Yes, no, because in parallel to the work that we were doing, our Black colleagues were similarly going through a similar journey, right? And so that is one of the things that also is very helpful, right? Because you think about what are things that we should learn from each other, right? And what are the things that we should work together, because we actually are facing like common set of questions, for example. And what is interesting today, that our Institute for Economic Mobility has 3 pillars, a Latino pillar, a Black pillar, and another pillar focused on rural communities.
Do you have data or insights that help us build the case that economic mobility for the Latino community benefits everyone, that it's not a zero-sum game?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, I feel like I could give you a lot of
Give
different
us,
stats,
you're ready.
but
No.
like some of my favorite, numbers. If we look at 2023 and we think about small businesses, we know small businesses are part of the engine, of a key engine, right, in our economy. 36% of those small businesses were started by Latinos. But the reality is that those Latino-owned small businesses tend to face bigger hurdles in accessing capital that limit their ability to growth. What we calculated is that if we were able to close those funding gaps, for example, that exist, right, and other barriers that are getting in the way of scaling those businesses at pace comparable to what you see for other groups, we could be adding over 6 million jobs to the economy. That is jobs for everyone, right? That is a really massive number. We're talking about moving more than 1.5 million families into the middle class.
Wow.
Things like that really, again, help everyone. One of the pieces of work that we did last year that we were very excited by the attention was looking at Latino representation in Hollywood. And we looked at it holistically, right? As an example of what's happening in front of the camera, behind the camera. Some of the insights that we took from that research is that Latinos punch above their weight when it comes to, for example, movie ticket sales, right? Latinos make up 19% of the population, but are purchasing about 25% of the movie tickets. But what we find when we start looking into what are the movies that tend to do better, both in terms of, ticket sales, but also in terms of awards, right? Actually, when you have more Latino representation in front and behind, that correlates with that better performance. And, Latinos in Hollywood was just one lens. We've done the same type of work looking at financial institutions and understanding this underserving of the Latino consumer, how much economic value it's actually leaving on the table, right? Which clearly makes the case that investing in and closing the gaps that exist today build a stronger economy. And that stronger economy means more goods, more services, more jobs for everyone.
You clearly have a consultant mindset and like the methodology. What we know is that the work, for example, that we're trying to do here with A La Latina is to provide the playbooks. Number two, we want to provide the role models so that if you can see it, you can be it, and also the networks. The work that Hispanic Star and the World Human Foundation is trying to do is to literally just like remove the barriers of stereotypes, of that perception, because we know that the perception is not only the lens through which people see you. That gap of capital that you talked about for small businesses, might be the bankers are not willing to give you credit because they don't know you and they have stereotypes and so on. So how do we translate all of the data, guide us to the roadmap of getting from changing the perception to upward mobility and economic mobility for all?
Yes, and Claudia, you're making me think of actually one of the stats that surprised me the most as we were doing the research, particularly around small businesses. I think there's this dichotomy that we have with Latinos. We tend to think we are great socializing, right? And building strong connections. And I think we see it every day. But this is frankly why I was surprised when we looked at the data for the strength of the professional network. And what we found over and over again for Latinos, the strength of the professional network tends to be weaker. Latinos tend to have narrower professional networks and rely much more on friends and family, whether it is for the capital to like open start a business and asking friends for a loan versus like perhaps interacting with a bank, maybe, for different reasons, right? And to me, that's a critical element that we need to translate is how do we use this natural strength to form connections, right? The trust building, the listening, the empathy, right? The entrepreneurial spirit, right? We know Latinos have the highest rate of entrepreneurship of any demographic group in the US, but that is not translating, I would argue, to how we are building those professional networks. And so when I think about my own journey, right, the sponsors that I've had along the way have been instrumental. And guess what? The majority of them did not look like me. When I started at McKinsey, there were 4 partners that took me under their wing.
Why did they take you?
I think they saw something in me, someone who was curious, right? Someone who was willing to work hard, someone who, more than anything, I think it was this desire to learn. And because that is indeed one of the things that I think has always defined me. But to me, it was really interesting because I was expecting perhaps that the people who would, first mentor, and typically the mentors, then some of them become sponsors, would look more like me. But be it because there were not as many of them or other reasons, it happened to be these 4 Indian men. And they were and continue to be amazing forces in my life. So one of the key things I'm always telling people is think about who your sponsors are and they don't have to look like you. And by the way, you don't get everything from one person. I think it was for me really interesting to realize that there's different things that each of those 4 men did for me. One of them was wonderful at pushing me to just be bolder in my aspirations, right? I would say we can get this done in 3 months. And he would always be, What would it take to get it done in one? And he basically built a muscle in me to always be pushing to answer the question, what would you have to believe to do it faster, to do it better, to make it last longer? That's a great muscle to have, which frankly, I just, before getting, apprenticed by him,
Yeah.
it wasn't there, right? Another one, he was wonderful because he opened so many doors for me. He would take me with him to meetings where he was meeting the CEO of our clients, and I got to watch him in action, how he counseled them. And to me, that showing me like you bring someone with you, right? He was role modeling for me what opportunity creation looks like, and I could see him in action counseling. What does effective listening look like, right? How do you structure, a recommendation? And so I learned a lot from him. From another person, another one of them, it was this idea of he's just a phenomenal communicator. And so I learned to be a better communicator from him, right? And so on and so forth. So neither one of them was someone I was hoping to emulate 100%, but they each had attributes that I really valued. And so I really invested in the relationship.
You know what? I had an epiphany. I spent 3 years in consulting. I worked
Yes.
at BCG. And up until 30 seconds ago, I thought that the industry was set up in a way that it was basically designed to squeeze the most out of you and discard you. So let me explain what I mean. In consulting, I think in McKinsey, BCG, Bain, maybe others, at least when you're early in your career, you don't specialize. You get like put in different projects, and you may never see the partner that you worked with again. Like they just assign you the partner or the principal. You work mostly with the principal if you're an associate or a consultant. They just give you work. They work you super hard for a few weeks or a few months, depending on how long is the project. And then the project is done. You are on the beach until they assign you to another project, right? And in my mind, every time I would explain this to people, I would say, there's no incentive for the principal to invest in your development because they may never see you again. So they really are not there giving you feedback, making you be a better consultant. They're just there to squeeze the most work out of you. And that's up until now, I always felt what a horrible industry to be in, because when I worked in the industry, I would be with my same manager for years. So I felt like I built a much stronger relationship. And you just made me realize that on the flip side, every few weeks or every few months, you have an opportunity to build another sponsor, to get another sponsor. So it's almost like I took the cynical attitude of my career, and I didn't last. I learned a lot. It was like I still use all the frameworks that I learned, but I was very disheartened by the industry. And now I feel like I should have, maybe I shouldn't have known this, because who would have told me, who would have taught me this? But it is an industry that I think it's an excellent way to start your career. So now my question to you is, if our audience wants to work in consulting in McKinsey or one of the big firms, obviously if they like these firms go recruit in big schools. If you're not in one of the Ivy Leagues or the schools that McKinsey recruits from, how does somebody get a job in a consulting firm?
Yes. Well, I think a lot has changed, right? And maybe I will start by saying one of the things, I spent a lot of time in the office, right? So when I was on the beach early on, I would literally see who I would meet by, the kitchen area, and I would literally ask, what are you working on? Anything I can help you with? That was instrumental to me beginning to build those relationships, right? Because those partners saw something, right? Like, oh, she's willing to learn. And by the way, I think during those beach experiences, you really get to know people, right? So I think that was absolutely essential. Something that may surprise you, right? At McKinsey, there's thousands of sources that we recruit from. But by the way, we recently elected our first partner who didn't even go to college.
Wow.
So it
Okay.
just goes to show we actually have partners with very different backgrounds, some who come from having been in the military, people who come with backgrounds like mine in science and in the research lab, who basically got to McKinsey and had to learn what Excel meant and how do you use it. So I think that's actually one of the things that's changing the most, and that gets me really excited. It's just the diversity of profiles, right? That we bring together. because that's what we need, right? Like the types of problems that we're looking to solve are really complex, right? And so the idea that you would have a team of people who all have the same, they got their MBA from a top business school. We want them still, right? But it's not enough, right? We need much more varied backgrounds. And that's what we're seeing. So for anyone, for example, wanting to apply to McKinsey, I do think we have a website that has a ton of information. And also because the types of roles that we have now are very different. Whereas before you would think of the profile to be a consultant looked a certain way. Now we're hiring people who are data scientists, data engineers, who are designers, right? So it's very, much more varied. And so there's many different ways of coming into the
Lucy,
firm.
I want to ask you about health, and I am so proud of you and what you have done with health. I want to make sure that the audience get to know Lucy Pérez, the trailblazer of health, opening up the doors and really providing opportunity for all on that space. But I don't want to leave the building the business case.
Yes.
The way that you would do with health is saying, like, if you have a better health, then you're going to be able to have a better family and a better job, and therefore you're going to have better economic outcomes, and therefore upward mobility, and therefore economic opportunity for all. Build that business case for those young Latinos that have the advocacy of advancing their Latino community, but are doing it maybe through either pure data, which is not breaking through, or through more like advocacy, civil rights, justice. How do we connect what's happening right now to people that don't see that connection of upward mobility?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll start with like talking about intergenerational mobility. That's the foundation of the American dream, right? That all children do better than their parents, or that is in a way how we think of the American dream. When you look at the data and you look at intergenerational mobility for those who are in the bottom quartile of economic opportunity, what you see is actually Latinos tend to outperform, right? And there are many theories and findings that, support what's going on there. But ultimately, what you're talking about is when we have, more people who are able to generate more wealth, right? And the biggest the most common way to generate wealth is actually intergenerational wealth, right? What one generation leaves for the other to inherit. Latinos today, unfortunately, are on the lower end when we look at those intergenerational wealth transfers, right? So when you think about the equation of saying, how do we build wealth, right? Like how are we building wealth? It is about how are we building wealth for individuals, right? And the mechanisms, be it through the roles that they play as workers in the economy, as savers, as investors, as entrepreneurs, or as consumers. In each of these categories, that's how you build a business case, right? You think about if you're a worker, what are the types of jobs that you're in today and what kind of job should you be aspiring to, right? What are the skills that will help you get to a better paying job, right? One that will allow you to generate more wealth that not only you get to benefit, your family gets to benefit, and future generations get to benefit. You're an entrepreneur, same idea, right? How do we address those barriers that exist today in accessing capital? Because we know when we invest in that entrepreneur and that entrepreneur has a stronger business, is able to generate more jobs, that is good not only for the entrepreneur, it is good for the employees, right, that are part of that business. It is good for the consumers who now have more choice in terms of the products and services. It is good for the local economy. Those jobs are generating taxes, right? Like all of that is contributing to a stronger economy. So closing these gaps, and we could go down each of the rows, right? It is all about how do we help individuals have a stronger wealth creation journey that benefits them, their families, their societies, their workplaces, and with a stronger economy for everyone. Because that's the thing, it's not just about the individual, this is all interlinked. Is this getting a little closer to that business case that you're...
It's pretty much, I think that what, like a lot of the people that come to us tell us, all of the activities that I was doing in my corporation are being shut down. DEI, my employee resource group, all of the blocks are, all of the roads are blocked. How do I do it? I think that this is going backwards. And I think that the point is to tell them, no, you can actually make sure that you yourself understand what you're doing by mobilizing and changing the perception and actually trying. Is all about wealth wealth creation that is going to be of the benefit of your employee or your society or whatever it is if you're an entrepreneur, which ultimately will benefit, like societies at large.
Yes.
So I think it is moving the conversation.
It is, and it is exactly focusing on the
Reframing.
economic
Right.
opportunity, right? Because if I use as an example, I'll use, in healthcare, like pharmaceutical companies, right? I spend a lot of my time advising them, right? Their goal is to design new interventions, whether we're talking about a diagnostic or a drug, right, or a vaccine that reach as many patients as possible. Because they know that when they're designing a drug that fits the needs of multiple communities,
More
that's
consumers, better
that's
outcomes.
when they do better, right? This is when, not only will they make more money, they're going to be gathering more data, more evidence that is going to inform the next generation of the product. So they will talk about, they want to meet the needs of all their customers, right? And so I think this idea of really understanding who are our customers, right? And how are we meeting their needs? Because when we do, growth follows.
Right. Okay. We're gonna continue this conversation, but I did want to make sure that people know the Lucy Perez, the trailblazer in health, and what you have been able to do there. Just guide us from the idea to the White House.
Yes. And again, you'll see how everything ends up, connecting, because when COVID happened and we were doing a lot of research for Latino economic mobility, we decided to look at the data on COVID deaths, right? And in that first year in the US, about half of the deaths from COVID happened to Latinos, even though Latinos only make up about 19% of the population. Seeing that number was heartbreaking.
And also we're younger, right? So
Yes.
we should be less
You're
immunocompromised.
right, actually.
Yes.
I didn't think of that. Yeah.
That's right. And so that was heartbreaking, right? And so part of what we started working on is really making the case, similar to what we were just talking about, how by investing in health for everyone, everyone benefits, and understanding what are the health needs of different populations, how can you meet them to create that better outcome. And as we got into conversations of health equity, something that really stuck with me was that every time we focus on health equity, we tend to lead with racial disparities and understand what are the differences between different ethnic groups. But we were not talking really about sex-based differences. That was going in a way unnoticed. And I raised it with, a couple of colleagues who were similarly interested. And I said, we should start looking at the data and what does the data tell us? And we published a paper looking at conditions that impact only men or only women and how are they diagnosed. And what we found is that if it's a condition that impacts only men, the rate of diagnosis is the same whether the diagnosing physician is a male or a female. But when we're looking at those conditions that impact women only, the diagnosis rate was much higher for women diagnosing the condition than a male physician diagnosing. And yet the overall rate of diagnosis was significantly lower than it was for male specific conditions. And so to us, that was very telling. We need to be doing more to understand sex-based differences. Around that time, the World Economic Forum team had seen that paper, and they had reached out to see if we wanted to collaborate with them to look at the economic impact of investing in women's health. This was 2023. And I have to tell you, when I first got that call, I'm thinking, it's 2023. Do we need to make the case that there's benefit of investing in women's health? Clearly, we do. And so we decided that that would be a great opportunity to collaborate. Because when you take a big topic like that, I mean, doing it in a collaborative way, it is, much better. And so they had already brought together a coalition of more than 50 organizations. And we spent a couple of months debating how are we going to define women's health, because there were some people who wanted to make it only about maternal and child health. We at McKinsey had a strong commitment to a definition of women's health that is all the conditions that impact women uniquely, differently, or disproportionately. The World Economic Forum team agreed we would use that definition. And so we spent several months working with them, building the analytics, building the model. And we showed several things that I think really surprised people. For example, people assume that because women live longer than men, that women are healthier. But what we found is actually women spend 25% more time in poor health than men do. 25% more time. And so when I would share that stat, most people would be like, of course, that makes sense because women live longer. It's concentrated at the end of life. No wonder they live longer. So of course they have to spend more time in poor health. Well, guess what? The majority of that time in poor health is between ages 20 to 60. So it's
When
not
we
at
have
the end of
kids.
life. It is exactly, and also during women's prime working years. So it had huge economic implications. And so the next thing was people assumed that the majority of this health gap and this difference in time spent in poor health had to do with conditions that are unique to women. Actually, those conditions that are unique to women only account for about 5% of the disease burden. The majority of this gap is coming from conditions that impact women differently, like heart attacks that manifest differently in women, or conditions that impact women disproportionately, like migraines or psoriasis, right? And so those were all facts that I think really surprised people. But then the key was we put a number around it, right? And we said we're losing over $1 trillion in global GDP each year
Because of that
because of this.
25% of poor health.
Exactly. Exactly. And the 1 trillion, I mean, it caught on. People are like, oh my God, we are leaving value on the table. It's not only that women are spending more time in poor health, but that's a lot of economic productivity lost.
And then that's when you were called to the White House.
Well, exactly. Like bringing some of those findings, we had a chance to share them at a conference, yes, that the White House convened.
And that was able to impact policy. I do want to say, like, it's such an honor to have a Hispanic woman leading that type of work that is going to have an impact in policy, in corporate spending, in investment, and so on. And I do think that it takes a Latina to be able to put so many parts together, because like working with so many different industries and bringing it so far along, it does go to what we do really well, which is building trust and building
Community.
building community.
Because that's exactly what we needed, right? Had it been just us, McKinsey, by ourselves, it wouldn't have had this traction. I think that it was the trust that was built with so many different stakeholders in the private sector, in the public sector, in the social sector, and making the connections. It is about health, it's about the economy, right? It is about individuals, it is about societies, it's about workplaces, right? Everyone benefits when we get this right. It's again back to those win-wins.
Lucy, can we get to know you a little bit better?
Of course.
Because I feel like I haven't gotten your superpower. So can you talk to us about like what have you developed as your superpower that has made you stand out?
It's always hard to answer this question, but I really think the thing that sets me apart are one, it's just the curiosity that I have about people, about the world. I am someone that if you sit next to me, I will start asking questions because I want to get to know you. I think so many times, I mean, the random connections that you're able to make, it's what makes life fun, right? I feel like I used to be a very shy person. You talk to my high school friends and they're like, they would never, label me as an extrovert. Now I am the kind of person that's always wanting to connect with others because you never know what random connection you're going to make, right? So that's something that gives me a ton of energy. And I think that also translates into how I build teams, right? I love going after big problems. There's no way I can do that on my own. It takes a team, right? So I invest a lot of time in thinking about, okay, what's the team we need? Who are the allies that we need? How do we create space so that everyone benefits? I need to make it attractive for others to want to be part of this team. So I'm quite intentional about things like that. Yeah.
And have you had setbacks in your career?
Of course.
How have you overcome them?
And setbacks also related to being a Latina woman.
Yeah, I mean, but it is funny, right? Like sometimes people ask me, is it because you're a Latina? Is it because you're a woman? And I'm like,
Is it because you're a Perez?
exactly, right? And it's like, I don't know the why. I'm sure all of it comes together in some way. But yeah, of course, the setbacks happen all the time. And it can be the things like this pivots, right? Like thinking you're going to go down one path, go to med school, go to pharma, and you find yourself having to pivot, right? I think those are setbacks. Having setbacks because you don't get a promotion when you think you're going to get the promotion, or that you think you're going to be, doing a particular project and you lose that project. It
Yeah, that
happens
happens all the time.
all the time, right? But for me, one of the things that I ground myself on is gratitude. I look back to my parents' journey, the sacrifices they made, and the opportunities they were able to provide for me. And I look at myself and I'm in a place of privilege, right? Like the opportunities that they created make it, I can only be grateful. And remember, tomorrow's another day. So long as you're in good health, you can, try again. And I'm a big believer in, okay, so it didn't work out the first time. You get up, do this and try again.
And it came from your parents
Oh, for sure.
immigrating.
Like their story of, just hard work and trusting in the kindness of others, right? I think we often think that other people are seeing us and what we're going through. Everyone's so busy, they have so much going on. We actually have to also speak for ourselves, right? I often tell people no one's a mind reader, but almost everyone gets a joy from helping someone else. And so if you think about that, it's like, how do you then almost also sometimes see this opportunity when you're asking for help, whether it's in problem solving something or bringing a skill as an opportunity to for another person to contribute, to feel like they're part of something else, and that can be a source of joy for them as well. So that's a muscle that I also tend to rely on.
And so just like build on the playbook, let's put the Lucy Perez playbook.
Yes.
I heard no one is a mind reader, but also you went and volunteered a lot in your beach time. You were like, how can I help you? How can I help you? So bringing
Yes.
value, but also making sure that you're also open about what you need. Tell us about the
Yeah.
Lucy Perez playbook.
So it
To all
begins.
young Latinas that are so in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, right, what has worked, again, leading with that curiosity and sense of purpose, right? Like, I like to think, this definition of purpose, that's how do you bring your passions and your desire to serve others together, right? And that's in a way, that's what I like to work on, right? It makes it easier to attract others who share that purpose and want to work with you to build something bigger. And so that to me it's really important. So it really relies on a lot of communication, relationship building, right? It is that idea that when we're together we're stronger, and we should aspire and dream big, right? Because I just don't want to live a life where I end up thinking, what if I had done that?
Yeah.
What if I had tried? That's I that would really make me sad if I didn't take a shot, because what's the worst that can happen? It didn't work. Okay, now you try a different route.
It sounds like you have no regrets.
Oh, I do have some regrets, of course. I think everyone does, but probably that it took me too long to really trust myself, to be so open. I remember when I started at McKinsey, I was so formal because I thought I had to fit a certain stereotype of corporate America, right? And in the way that I dressed, the way that I communicated, the key way to describe me back then was so formal. And I am not that person anymore. And I wish I had recognized that I could be my authentic self much earlier, because it was self imposed. It really, I look back on it, and that was what was holding me back. It took one of my clients who had spent a day together, and we were about to leave for the day. His name's Mark, and he said, Lucy, you are so much fun. I wish I had seen this side of you sooner. And at first, I'm like, do I get to be offended about this? And then I'm like, no, actually, feedback is a gift. And too often, we, can take it personally. But to me, it was this unlock. It's like, Mark wanted me to be this way sooner, right? That I didn't need to be so rigid. So, like, okay, we're going to do this. And then next thing. And that was the beginning of me experimenting. And then, of course, my mentors at McKinsey similarly pushing me to really be myself. And it got to the point where I realized, I told myself, I should be myself all the time, because if it works, fantastic. And if it doesn't work, then I'll know. And it's okay, right? If you have to move on or do something different. But again, no what if. What if I had done it my way? So as I reflect on the last few years, I've had so much more joy in my day to day. And I think, I mean, many would recognize that the truer you are to yourself, the easier it is to find joy in what you do every day.
Is it easier, but also are you more productive?
Oh, that too, for sure. Exactly, because you also recognize what it takes to do something, right? And for me in particular, it's always thinking about the team, right? How do we create and bring the right team along to get something done? Because when you're getting it done and you're having fun while you're doing it, my God, that's the best win-win.
Oh, this is amazing. Well, I only have a word, which is gracias for being here with us today.
Gracias a ustedes.
Thank you. Gracias, Lucy.
Because with your wisdom and your incredible time today, we're going to be able to lead and succeed.
A la Latina!